I've just finished a classic sci-fi fantasy by C J Cherryn. It's called Cuckoo's Egg. It's got a really nice classic sci-fi vibe cover happening there. And I didn't love it. I do love C J Cherryn's writing. Her writing style always gets me and I always find it enjoyable. I enjoy the actual reading of the words, which is good because there's a lot that I didn't love about this particular one. Essentially, this is a 319 page book. It's not a tiny one. And of those 319 pages, approximately 305 are the reader and the protagonist being entirely in the dark as to what's happening. So that's maybe not awful, but it gets very exasperating at some stage. So this particular edition, which with its 319 pages, is a Methuen paperback, and this one was published in Great Britain in 1987. It was first published in 85, and it's got a couple of themes. I think they're around a fair bit in the 80s actually. It's a human child, grows up to adulthood among aliens, being brought up in the alien culture, never seeing another human being. In this particular case, Thorn, who is the child, doesn't know what human beings are. The dearth of information that is supplied to Thorn and to the reader is truly monumental. In an age where every other author writing fantasy or young adult or dystopia seems the need to info dump without cease, I suppose it should be refreshing to find a book where nothing is ever explained until the last couple of pages, but I can't honestly say that I loved it. The fact that Thorn is being repeatedly lied to and not told he's from another species for most of his childhood, it's a bit naff. And this is a sort of boy to man type story. It borrows heavily from every martial arts type story you've ever read. Think the bride being trained in oldie Asian martial arts in Kill Bill. Think, I suppose, what was that Win Chong Young Boy movie that happened in the early 80s? I'm sure someone will know. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, whatever. Anyway, we had a lot of this theme, and in books you've got the child being raised to be Battlestar ready by aliens so that he doesn't think like a human. Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein did it in the 60s. Ender's Game did it a lot in the 80s, around about the time this was published. I'm pretty sure that there's a whole heap more of them. They don't spring to mind right now, but I know it was a common theme. The theme of a person being mentally and physically tortured in order to become a great fighter, that's a theme that has had popularity that never completely wears off. There's a very strong Asian martial arts, Zen, etc. type vibe to it. What was that other one? The one that Ursula Le Guin liked so much, Taoism. There's a lot of all of that in here. But mostly you could argue that the rearing of the poor old Thorn is very cruel. He's not given any affection. He's being reared by a species that isn't his own and who doesn't recognize human anything. And along the way we realize that the sole guy who's rearing him, Dun, is molding him into this fighter. Dun himself is a Hatani. Hatani is a very respected clan in this civilization. And a Hatani is you have to get the notion of what a Hatani really is through reading. So, what exactly is Hatani? Glad you asked. If you figure it out, by all means drop me a line. Everything down says about Hatani is about how they are these awesome impartial judges who have nothing, own nothing, travel the planet settling disputes in ways that aren't often the way the person asking for the dispute to be settled expects. But there's no law or moral training that's really stands out in this book. Thorn gets taught little songs and little Aesop's fables type stories about Hatani judgments, but essentially what he's taught is how to fight. How to fight and be beaten and get up and fight again. So it would appear that this Hatani incredible moral judge, the main thing they require is the ability to kill people. It's written in the 80s. I've seen worse themes come out of the 80s, to be sure, but that was a little bit meh, and you had so much time to think about it because there wasn't a lot happening for the first 305 pages of the book. So you had time to cogitate about the beauty of the writing, the absence of characters, the third-person narration that included a lot of torment, and that is something Cherryn does like, and she does in her other books. There's always an element of trauma in her characters and her situations, and the trauma can be acute and crippling. If you associate a lot with the characters, it can be quite bad for you. So this is allegedly part of a series, and having grown up reading science fiction, usually in isolation, so I read them book at a time, I have to feel that sometimes these series are retroactive. So where is it? Right now she's embarked in a huge foreigner series that I'd love to read, but I can never get them from the library, and there's an awful lot of them. So, this is part of a series, not Foreigner, not Eye of Time. Oh, for goodness sake. Port Eternity is the first. And I really loved Port Eternity. It's one of the books that I've carried around my whole life. Oh, there we go. Age of Exploration #1 is Port Eternity. Love that one. The trauma in there is through the roof. But yes, this is meant to be #3 of the Age of Exploration. I know I've read the middle one. I remember not loving it as much as Port Eternity. Didn't know it was meant to be part of a series. I think it is blindingly obvious that this is a standalone and not part of a series. It feels to me, I'm fairly confident this series, Age of Exploration #1 and 3, came along after they'd been written. Yeah. So there's a lot in here. Yeah, and you have to like the writing. You have to be okay with this human child being raised by aliens, weird stuff's happening. You have to be okay with the fact that you're not going to know what's happening until right at the end. And when the actual conclusion to what's going on finally happens, it's a bit of a letdown. It's like, it's not particularly unexpected by then. Because, so at page 186, I made a note. It's like, I'm kind of losing hope that anything will ever really happen except Thorn and Dunn training. Thorn being miserable, humiliated, emotionally manipulated. Dunn is training Thorn to be Hatani for reasons that remain misty and which are never explained. No questions are asked by Thorn because he is tormented if he asks any. So I feel like this is a book I'm going to think about a lot. I think I'm going to come back to it. I'm not letting it out of my sight, no loaning that one out. I'm going to keep it. I'll probably read it again in a few years and think about it some more in the meantime. Should you read it if you like Cherryn's writing? If you're one of those people who just really doesn't warm to Cherryn's writing in general, then my best guess is that you will not like this at all, because all there really is her writing. If you love Asian mystic mountain training of young Uchideshi, I think the word is, then you will probably like this. Even though Thorn is actually the only human on this planet, the other ones are, what are they called? Nunchaku? What Nunchaku? That's the martial art thing. Okay, basically they're different species. The difference in the species are not acute. They seem to be bipedal. They're definitely mammal. They're covered in a soft fur that causes Thorn great distress when he doesn't grow his own fur. They have extrudable fangs. They're definitely retractable fangs. So I'm thinking something feline but bipedal. Fangs. Claws. Extruding retractable claws. But they do also have fangs. Better sense of smell. A lot of things that make them very mammalian. They're... Just assume that once you've been told they're alien and the Thorn doesn't look like them, and he's very embarrassed about that, and he keeps asking if there's more like him, and he's told no, there aren't. And that's the fact that he's being told that becomes difficult for the reader, because the reader knows that he's human. He's described as human. He's got to be. So from the start, it's blindingly obvious that Thorn is being lied to acutely. He's also being kept in isolation for reasons that become clear later. I'm really undecided about this. It's Cherryn. I love her writing, especially the science fiction. But there's so much about this that really is very, very meh. Okay, around about page 208, something did start to happen. Thorn and Dan had to leave the countryside where he grew up on this magical Asian-y martial arty mountain, and they move into the city, and then they start doing weird medical stuff, and that was pretty horrible. Poor old Thorn. He didn't have much in life. He was never given anything good, not even honesty. It's hard to feel more than mildly sorry for him, though, because he doesn't really emerge as a character. The third-person narration means that Thorn has no character. He's basically a cipher. And Thorn, aside from feeling vaguely sorry for the level of torment, misery, and loneliness, there's not a lot to associate with. I'm sure there's lots of really good morals and concepts in this book. They're not particularly appetizingly presented, however. And the weird thing about this is that if you go online and you read the reviews for this book, they are almost unanimously in the 4 to 5 star mark. I'm talking about Goodreads reviews here, by the way. So I did that at one stage because I was so uncomfortable with the book. I had to check out what other people thought of it, and mostly they loved it. It's kind of odd. Maybe I'll love it the second time I reread it. There's a few people that didn't warm to it particularly, but in general, people just adored it and reread it. Even the ones that didn't like it still gave it a 3. I will point out, as many other people have before, that calling it a cuckoo's egg, the title is as ambiguous, weird, and inconsistent as the story, let's just say, because cuckoos, both old and new world, lay their, even Australia, I think we've got our own native cuckoos. They find someone else's nest, they lay their eggs in it, the eggs are large, they slowly push away the chicks, and the host parents drive themselves into the ground, rearing someone else's eggs. It's a fairly good evolutionary choice as long as there aren't too many cuckoos out there. But in this case, not only does the alien Dawn know that he's raising another species, it's like he volunteered and he stepped up for that. So we get these little hints all the way along that there's a lot of politicking happening behind the scenes, and that's why Dawn has got Thorn, and this is why all this is happening. But it's not enough to really make the reasoning for it zing. And that's the thing. Well, it's beautifully written, as Cherryn's always are. Well, the concept is probably good and probably 80s enabled. There's no zing to this book for me, who loves the writing style. There's an awful lot of not very much happening, and then happening again, and look, it's still happening, and 50 pages, look, oh look, we're still doing the exact same thing. Look, if you love classic sci-fi, read it. If you read via audiobook, if it even is out there as an audiobook, I strongly recommend that you avoid it, because there's so much repetition. You have to be able to read it, and you have to be able to read with a lot of love or very fast to be able to get through it. With an audiobook, it would probably take you most of a year to get through it, and you probably wouldn't notice when you had. However, all those 4 and 5 stars floating around on Goodreads, I'm sure many of you think I'm completely mistaken and I have missed the point, and it's the most magnificent book that Cherryn ever wrote, so by all means tell me why I'm wrong, because I'm looking forward to hearing that. And if you really have a handle on what this Hatani is, by all means, yes, I know they've got a martial arts secret school on the mountain where you go to become indoctrinated. I know they're judges. If you've got a handle on it, let me know, because it's a complete and utter freaking mystery to me, I've got to say.